What do you think the future of the European Court of Human Rights is going to be?
It's a very sort of political question, Paul. There is no right or wrong answer to this. However, do you like to have running water in your house?
So my human right to having running water.
Yeah.
But Mitchell, I know what you're going to
and a fair trial.
I know what you're going to say, but before the ECHR, there was running water into the homes of British citizens. And when you talk about justice, the justice system was also well in place before the form. So when people make those sort of comments, they're scaremongering, right? So I don't take that as a valid point. But yes, absolutely. Just to answer your question so you can continue, I love having running water, even if it's overly chlorinated. And two, I love the right to a fair trial. Not that I've ever had to use that right, but it's nice to have it there if I ever do.
And what you have to look at, so the ECHR, so you've got the European Court of Human Rights, ECHR, and you've also got the European Convention of Human Rights, ECHR, right? The European Convention was brought in to basically stop the atrocities of World War II. So the Holocaust, persecution of one particular sort of person or peoples, that's what it was brought in to prevent. Okay, so all of these nations signed up and said, we can't allow what happened in Europe during the 1940s to happen again. So we will sign up to basically a convention that allows those people to sue governments and appeal to an independent court that sits outside of those nations to determine whether that is a breach of their human rights or not. That's what the ECHR does, okay? In the sort of news at the minute, you know, Nigel Farage, Reform, they're looking to leave the ECHR, even though we were the founding nation of it. Because in their view, any immigrant and any asylum seeker who comes to the UK and is refused can appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, and the EU stops us.
Not the EU. We've got to be careful there. It's the European Court of Human Rights.
So this is the way that they frame it.
Yeah.
The EU stops us. Okay? But they're two independent things.
Yeah.
The EU bloc has nothing to do with the European Court of Human Rights.
No, because there's 27 members of the European Union, and there are 46 signatories to the Euro, so they're quite distinctively different.
Exactly. And you know, there was a powerful statistic that came out recently following an Oxford study. Since 1980, the UK has only ever lost 13 deportation cases. Since 1980, okay? 4 of those related to what's known as Article 8, the right to family and private life. That's
but what someone on the other, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, would say is how many of those does the ECHR have to make before it becomes wrong? What number in your head would be wrong to have forced us to have taken back when our courts, the courts of this land, have said, no, sorry, you got to go? Is 1 being sent back bad enough? 10, 100? Would it have to be would we have to accept back 100,000 for you to say, okay, it's being silly?
I think
the highest court of this land has said, no, you can't stay.
Yeah, and again, I think it's difficult because it's a case-by-case basis. Okay, so without looking at the facts of those 13 cases, how do I know? It's a bit like, you know, if somebody appeals to the Court of Appeal, on the face of it, you could say, what they're appealing. When you start getting into the facts of that case, you think, oh, well, actually, they've got a case here.
But to get to the ECHR, they have exhausted their legal routes in this country.
The whole idea of the ECHR effectively is to protect those human rights. So what an individual can do is say, yes, I've appealed to the Court of Appeal, but I still don't think that they have taken into consideration the human rights element of this application when making their consideration here, okay? So then they can appeal to the ECHR. You don't automatically get the right to appeal. You have to apply for permission. If they say there's a case to be heard here, then they'll hear it, same as the Court of Appeal.
But the decision about whether the case should be heard at the ECHR is made by the ECHR.
It is.
So it's taken out of, this country should have sovereignty over its laws and its rules. And if the highest court in this land has said no, we then have to succumb to another another layer of judicial system where we can't say you have permission to appeal. Outside of the jurisdiction, a court, judges will sit there and say...
But that's the whole purpose of the ECHR. The whole reason it was created is to have an independent voice to say that what you're doing is illegal or legal. Okay? The ECHR doesn't say immigration policy in this country.
No.
That is our sort of purview to do what we want. And it doesn't do that for any nation that signs up to the ECHR. Okay? And only, in the last 45 years, the ECHR, it's the European Court of Human Rights, has only ruled that our immigration rules were a breach of the European Convention of Human Rights 3 times. Okay? I don't know what those 3 rules were, but we had to change them because they breached that. Okay? So, there is not any overreach here. It's serving the purpose that we, as a nation, set it up for, and the 46 signatories set it up for, which is to be independent of government and the judiciary of that country to protect those individuals.
But the public have trust in the judicial system here. Why do we need... And I understand why it was all set up, but time has moved on, and in the 2 wars that we talked about, England wasn't the aggressor. So frankly, we've got nothing to answer to. We've always been okay. Why is our judicial system... Why do we need a third-party intervention when the public trusts the judicial system here? There is faith in justice. And actually, the only issue arises for the public is when it leaves our jurisdiction and we allow a third party.
I understand. The idea is to take away any judicial bias that there might be. Okay, so any government pressure on the judiciary, any sort of unconscious bias. The idea is that there is an independent party to assess solely on whether it's a breach of human rights or not. Okay, because in UK law, what's a breach of human rights might not be what's a breach of the European Convention as a whole. So, you have to look at the elements slightly differently. And I agree with the points you've made. Why have it? But I think, it is there to protect, and I think it's overused. And that partly is lawyers using it as a safety net rather than accepting a case as a whole.
But what someone will be doing right now is screaming down their screen, saying, to protect who? Because a British citizen is never going to rely on it. It can only be
a British
someone.
Citizen has.
Go on then.
So if you were detained in custody, for example, and you were unlawfully detained and you sued the police for unlawful detention, that case was thrown out.
But we are talking about immigration.
Yeah.
I mean, there was also a problem when they wanted to give the prisoners the right to vote.
Yes.
And the ECHR said you have to give your inmates a right to vote, which was morally, is that right or wrong? They've given up their civil liberties. They've committed a crime against society. They're incarcerated for a reason. Should they be allowed to have any influence over politics or who governs this country? Question mark. Yeah. But in terms of an immigration case where someone has come to this country, those 13 that have come to this country, how many of them were second, third generation British citizens?
Well, probably none.
None.
They're appealing something.
So when the argument is made to the British people, it's to protect. They're saying, well, not to protect me. They're just saying, not to protect me.
No, it's to protect humanity as a whole.
Okay,
that's the idea.
I think that is the leap that people struggle with.
It is, and
because we're only so big,
me included.
Yeah,
you get focused on details when actually you forget what the bigger picture is here, and that is to basically uphold us as humans to a higher standard to stop what happened happening in World War II. That's the idea behind human rights. It's the reason they were put on paper and everyone signed up to it.
But like I said, the British weren't the aggressors. So
no. But the idea is we were the saviour.
You lot could sign up to it because you were the aggressors, but we don't need to because...
Yeah, but the idea is that sort of as a nation, we were leading that. We were pushing for that. And we sort of didn't want that to happen again, where our country was under such strain of, risk of invasion, change of way of life, and persecution across the board.
But did we not push it to regularise and to keep in check other nations. It was never intended to keep us in check.
Yeah, but you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't implement something on other nations and not sign up to it yourself.
You all sign up to this, so you lot will behave.
Yeah, and we'll police it. It doesn't quite work like that, because everyone will go, well, we're not going to sign up to it. So in order for those nations to sign up, we had to sign.
But now it causes us a problem when we fast forward.
I wouldn't say it causes us a problem. I think it's perceived incorrectly.